Okay, thank you everyone for coming to this popular culture dialogue. And we're taking an interesting tactic, and I really like this idea for this dialogue, because instead of looking at a specific topic in popular culture studies, we're looking at how to survive graduate school, maybe as a popular culture studies scholar. So we kind of want to think about, okay, well, what tips do various people who are in this field have in order to survive, getting a master's degree, getting a PhD, and then maybe talking to those students who are currently there, but also thinking about, well, okay, what would you say to an undergraduate who's thinking about going into, that type of scholarship? So I'm just going to throw it to each of our participants to introduce themselves and kind of tell us where they are in relationship to graduate school, in it, teaching it, certain years out of it. I know I was thinking last night how I am 13 years out, that my PhD at the end of this year would turn into a 13-year-old, which makes me think I get to be a rebel at this point and push back against my academic parents, but we'll see. So I'm just going to throw it open to all of you. I'm far too removed from graduate school, I think, to really do much good here, but I know everyone here could help. So we're going to throw over to Julia Largent first.
Hi, everyone. My name is Julia Largent. I'm the managing editor of PCSJ. So if you've ever submitted anything, you've probably heard from me, or your reviewer, you've heard from me. So thank you for all of your work. I graduated with my PhD in 2017. So what is that, like 3.5 years out from it? However, during my time, 3 of my 4 years of my PhD, I worked in a graduate college, working directly with theses and dissertations, and some of the paperwork that has to do with all of that. So I was actually very grateful for that experience when I was working on my own graduate work outside of my assistantship in the grad college.
So helped research with the mentorship program for MPCA, correct?
Yeah. So for 3 years, I was the graduate / new professional representative for Midwest PCA. And through that, we do a mentoring program. I did not create it, but I have carried it forward. And DJ Price is now taking that on. I'm also the vice president of Midwest PCA. So I'm kind of all over with Midwest and the journal. And I like pop culture, but I'm also very limited in my knowledge of movies. It's kind of I'm a weird pop culture scholar. But I focus on fan studies and documentaries when I do my research.
I'm going to throw over to Colleen, who's on my right here. Right, left, sort of.
Hi, I'm Etman. I am currently a PhD candidate at the University of South Carolina, working on my 2nd year and having a blast. It's so much fun to be in grad school during a pandemic, so that's been an interesting switch for me. I also am having an interesting experience, and I did not start grad school as a pop culture scholar. So I'm kind of transitioning now into more of my niche interests. I also really enjoy fan studies, but I'm also figuring out my interests and seeming to be leaning towards folklore studies. So that's kind of where I am, and yeah, just trying to make it through.
Just trying to make it through is like the slogan for this entire year plus now, I think, at this point too. Thank you, Colleen, for joining us today. And I'm going to go down to underneath you to Matthew.
Sorry, I had to unmute. Hi, I'm Matthew Hale, usually go by Matt. I'm an assistant professor at Austin Peay State University, where in the Department of Communication, and I'm kind of transitioning into the person who runs our pop culture minor, as long as it sort of didn't exist. And then I got here in 2018. And speaking of 2018 is when I finished my double PhD at Indiana University, half of which was in folklore and half of which was in the Department of Communication and Culture. And then prior to that, I did a master's in 2010. So it's been a while, but not too long ago that I got out of grad school. And then I teach now as part of my job. I teach classes in our online master's program in communication, professional communication. So that's my relationship with grad school. I'll get into it later. It's a complicated relationship in which I both love grad school and think it has a lot of problems, at least structurally, as how it exists.
That actually might be a good topic to cover in another dialogue, are the structural issues of popular culture studies in graduate school these days, or just graduate school. All right, so I'm going to go down below me to Dr. Leah. Let me know if I'm saying that right, because I don't know if I am.
It's Leigh, actually, but that's fine. Hi, everyone. I'm Leigh McKagen, and I recently finished my PhD in May of 2020, which was quite an experience. My program was actually not a pop culture program. It's actually an interdisciplinary program. I chose to study pop culture and science fiction narratives. In particular, my dissertation was a case study on Star Trek Voyager, taking a political theory approach to imperial narratives retained in the series. I have an English background, more specifically, so I finished my PhD from Virginia Tech last year. So that's my perhaps more recent relation to pop culture, but also a unique perspective in that I'm from not a traditional pop culture program. I was the only one doing pop culture in my program. So,
and that's quite common, unfortunately. But congratulations, almost a year late, but congratulations on passing. All right, we're going to go over to Brie.
All right. Hello, everyone. My name is Brianna Quade. I typically go by Brie. I'm a second-year PhD student candidate at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee in the history department. And I generally like to research music and like soul and hip hop and sort of how those communities were built and shaped, generally focusing on Philadelphia and looking at the memory and associations people have with those different genres.
Very cool. And I have my partner right now. He's doing his PhD at the UW-Milwaukee English department.
Oh,
so we'll have to make some connections. I don't know why I did the butting heads, but yeah, connections. There we go. But thank you, Brie, for being here today. And let's go down to Megan.
Hi, y'all. My name is Megan Condist, and I've graduated my PhD in 2014. So this is my 6th year working as an assistant professor. I've bounced around a couple places, but I've been at Texas Tech University for the last 3 years. And I do game studies. So kind of like Dr. Leigh was saying, I started in an English department who were like kind of mad that I was looking at video games as my text. And so I ended up pulling my dissertation committee together out of supportive English faculty and communication studies faculty. And my job now is in communication studies, even though my PhD says English literature. So, you know, kind of a weird winding road, but you know, one of the things I'm sure we'll talk about is assembling a team that's on your team. And that's kind of the only thing that ended up getting me through what grad school was, because I didn't really, you know, like Dr. Leigh was saying, there wasn't a cohort in my program that was doing pop culture or was looking at the kind of text that I was. So,
yeah, having that support network, which can be, you know, hard to put together, but once you have it, yeah, definitely very useful. And then we go down to Kristine.
Hi there, I'm Kristine Ketel. I'm awaiting acceptance to Bowling Green's American Culture Studies PhD program. So fingers crossed I hear something next week. Thank you. My research covers the effects that human-robot interactions in popular culture have on those relationships in real life. So are humans ready for robot coworkers, caregivers, and companions? So my research interests are humanoid and geminoid robots in fiction, culture, and society. Excuse me, human-robot interaction, humanoid and geminoid robots in the workforce, ethical behavior in the thinking robots, the depiction of otherness as shown through human-robot interactions in popular culture, and of course, robot mythology. My dissertation topic, the working title, is Robot, Friend or Foe? The Impact of Popular Culture's Depiction of Robots on the Societal Acceptance of Robots. I have a master's degree in liberal arts, Western philosophy from St. John's College in Santa Fe, and a bachelor's in communication from the University of Toledo in Toledo, Ohio. So a fellow Midwesterner. I've been adjunct faculty at both Northern Arizona University and Coconino County Community College. Both are in Northern Arizona, Flagstaff. And I've taught public speaking, humanities, management ethics, and other management courses. So I started off in this liberal arts idea, and then I had this 30-year career in industry. And now I finally, in my 50s, get to go back to my love. And I apologize, I didn't catch your name, but the speaker who was talking about, she's studying, has her PhD in popular culture, but wasn't really a film buff. I'm in that. My track is film, media, and culture, and I've really approached this outside of film and of learning to do film studies. So any advice you've got, I'm super open for how to bridge that gap. That's something new to me. And I'll be the first one in this program that's looking at AI and robotics and human robot interaction. So all of you who talked about bridging that and forging new frontiers, please, any advice or suggestions, I'm super open to that as well. And I'm excited to be part of this group. Thanks.
And I think that's one of the great things about like popular culture studies is that way in which we have so many different disciplines, so many different perspectives coming together, that one, it does, require that bridging of these gaps, which is a great talent to be able to learn for any type of work you want to do. But then it also allows for the develop of these support networks because you have people who've gone through it before. So maybe that's the first question for those who have gone through it before. Like, I'm going to look at the people now who have completed their entire PhD and they got the doctor. What would you recommend? What's like one of the biggest things that helped you to finish the PhD and to have your doctorate?
No, go ahead, Julia.
I had a very supportive advisor. It happened that I was his only advisee, which was both good and awful at the same time. He was also on sabbatical my 4th year, which is when I was writing my dissertation. And so he gave me his office though, which was nice. But because I was his only advisee, he gave me all of his attention, which both sides of the coin there. But just him constantly believing in me and knowing that, I can get finished and pushing me was really what got me going. And then just the cohort aspect. So I didn't mention, I went to Bowling Green in the media and communication program. I have several friends who went through ACS. Although they're very different programs, they're actually not connected. They're not even in the same school at BG. I had a lot of friends who were graduating. We very much operated in the cohort sense where there were 15 of us who went through from our very first year through, and you see your friends graduating, and that kind of motivates you as well. I don't want to be the only one left behind. And so that also motivated me of watching my cohort mates and my friends and colleagues starting to defend their dissertations started to also propel me forward as well. So that was my personal story. Thanks.
Yeah, I was going to take a similar track to what Julia had to say and echoing what Megan said earlier about a supportive team of advisors. The program that I was in was not a pop culture program, as I said, but it was an interdisciplinary program. And so we were it was designed that we would pull our advisors from a variety of different, liberal arts programs, including history, and our religion and culture is a program at Virginia Tech. I actually did not pull anyone from the English department. for a number of reasons, although there was some great potential there as well. But having a supportive team is incredibly helpful. And also, and I believe it was either, and maybe also Megan who mentioned this earlier, that it can be hard to find kind of a cohort, maybe if you're in a program that's not traditionally a popular culture program. And I was very much in that boat as well, although I did have a very close set of friends who were both just a little bit above me. Actually, they were all just a little bit farther along than I was, because I actually started in a January sequence out of order. And so I was really the only one who started at that point. So watching them go through it and also being able to talk about some aspects of my research, even if it wasn't exactly the same. For example, I do a lot of post-colonial theory, and one of my close friends also worked with post-colonial theory in a very different context, but there was enough of an overlap and a relation in the way we were engaging the material that support network was also exceptionally, really fundamental for me to be able to succeed, especially when I was in a situation with, while I had a supportive team of committee members, not all of them, some of them had seen some Star Trek. One of them had seen Voyager, and my chair had not watched any at all, but he was wonderful, but it put me in an interesting position, which might bring up sort of the main point that I brought in to share, which we can maybe get into later, but establishing a solid scholarly justification that you can point to for why you're doing this particular research, even in a pop culture program that obviously sees merit in it, I think is a useful thing as well. But maybe we can follow this thread first before we get there.
Yeah, that's a really good one. We'll definitely have to cover that one. Matt?
Yeah, I jot down a few things. In addition to having a support structure, I think remembering that reading and writing is in research is social. And as a result, you should probably continuously build a community and talk to other people about the things that you wrote, because I think it's very easy to get in your own head and go like, wow, what I just wrote is the worst sentence or paragraph or chapter that any human being has ever written, the worst thought that's ever existed. And then you let other people some way. So remember head and just exist in a space where you and a computer spend time every day and that's all you do. Try to live a whole life. These are things that I wrote down in my tiny little notebook, but I'm also telling myself this. Living a whole life was really important to me. I wasn't my dissertation and trying to continuously remind myself that I'm a human being and I'm writing a dissertation, but they are not the same thing. So like exercising, trying to eat well, taking breaks and rewarding myself if I accomplish something, practicing self-care, going to therapy while you're doing a dissertation, I think is a really good, really good, it's a good service. I think every human being should essentially go to therapy. I think it's wonderful, but it really helped me to sit down and talk to someone who wasn't in my discipline and wasn't a part of my committee and just be like, this is kind of what I'm thinking about this week. Does this make any sense? And you can kind of unpack it with another human being who's not really invested in whether you finish the dissertation or going to publish it. And then two other things, building a daily schedule. If you're a person who requires that, I'm a very organized person. Building a schedule helped me tremendously, and having goals. And if you exceed them, wonderful, but just try to have goals. And then I'm a big fan of tiny little journals. I'm a very digital person, but I think being able to, I would go on long walks and having an analog, like a pen and paper, and just, I would think about like, some post-humanist theory that I hadn't thought of because I saw someone walking down a pathway with their phone and having an interaction. I was like, oh, okay, that's an interesting thought. Jot it down. And then later something might come of it. Maybe not, but at least I had those thoughts someplace. So that's my few thoughts, and they were collected in my journal.
Yeah, I like that idea too of remembering that a support network shouldn't just be fellow academics regardless of what stage they're in, but people outside of academia. If you have them or you don't, yeah, having people outside of academia that you can try to express and explain things to helps you definitely get outside of your head. So thank you for that. Megan?
Yeah, so I'm thinking about one of the things that I kind of came into this that I was like, this is going to be my like thing that I want to talk about is when you are assembling your committee specifically. Even if you are in a, specifically pop culture oriented program, and all the faculty like are totally on board and they're like, oh yeah, I totally understand why you want to study anime or whatever. Like, because if you're outside of that, you have to do some persuading, and that's the whole thing. But even if you are in that program already, when you're choosing your committee, you want to not just look at the CVs that are involved and try to pick a team of all superstars, because a lot of times, you know, as a graduate student, you maybe aren't aware of the political undercurrents that are happening in the department. And if you have 4 superstars in your committee, that means you have 4 people who are going to want to pull you and mold you in different ways. So really being thoughtful about assembling your committee and kind of giving them roles. So for my committee, I had one like content person who knew about video games, knew about online culture. And she was like the person I would lean on for, I need you to tell me, you know, who's the person I should be reading for this, like that kind of reader. I had one person who was my like theory person. I had one person who was just my like supportive, come in if you want to freak out about how could you possibly write so many words in 1 year person, like just my, you know, like, and, you know, they also had expertise to share, but like they knew that when I came to talk to them, it was about applying for jobs and dealing with stress and like navigating, you know, the waters of the department. And so because everyone kind of knew and joined the committee with that job in mind, there was no ego fighting, or there was no, you know, warring over who this student or this dissertation belongs to. And I think as a graduate student, sometimes you aren't aware, like, you know, when you're in an undergraduate class, your teachers are just there to like give you the content and give you the tests, and you don't have that, like, what happens when multiple professors get into the room and they all have their idea about what you should be doing for your dissertation. And I was lucky someone had kind of clued me into that piece of the puzzle of composing your committee for harmony in addition to academic, you know, muscle. So that would be one thing I would recommend. And just, you know, find a faculty member or a more advanced student that you trust, that you can kind of ask about these questions. They will have the skinny on who are some of the people who maybe don't get along in the department, that even though if you look at them on paper, they do this similar things, they are oil and water. And so don't put them on the same committee. Do your research into that side of it. And, you know, that will make the process go a lot smoother, and will make it so that rather than wrangling your committee members can wrangle you, which is how it should be.
I like that idea too, Megan, about, you know, don't just pay attention to their CV when you're making decisions, because I think that applies even all the way back to when you're applying for programs, because sometimes you see like, ooh, this is the big name, this is the superstar, and you want to go work with them, but you don't really know who they are. And it could be, and maybe this is something that would work, it could be that if you can, as an undergrad or an MA, make sure you're going to the conferences where that person's going to, and see them outside of the classroom, so you can get a better sense as to who they are. And that can help you to know whether or not you actually want to work with them on something as intense as the PhD.
Or even just shoot them an email. Like sometimes that can be really revealing. How do they deal with you saying, hey, I was just curious about whether you're accepting students right now? And sometimes the way people respond will tell you a lot.
Oh yeah, that's another good way of doing it too.
And if they respond, for what it's worth. Yeah, don't underestimate the power of having, I had a committee member who in my head always just called her my cheerleader, because she was wonderful. She was certainly very helpful critically as well. But she would always just say, hey, Leigh, this is great. You're doing a good job. And that was really, really helpful, especially by the time I had a baby and there was a pandemic and I was trying to finish. And it was like, oh God.
For the Colleen and Brie, who are currently in their PhD programs, if I remember correctly, what's helping you right now to survive this process?
I mean, really everything that everybody has kind of been saying has gotten me through this. And I've done 2 masters before, and it was really the community experience, I guess, and just having that group of people that understand what I'm going through and are there, even if they don't know how stressed I am, at least just having somebody to vent to. but especially for doing the PhD, you know, there are times that I wasn't quite sure if I could do it, if I was going to be in over my head. Can I really stick out 2, 3 to 5, whatever, how many years more of school? Because I've done it for, you know, 4 years of grad school, undergrad. But when I got to my PhD, which I also, at the same school, I did my undergrad. So I knew the department and I knew kind of how it worked. But obviously, you know, 6 years, 7 years later, things changed. And it was coming in, I was like, well, you know, am I going to like the people? Am I going to, you know, like my coworkers? Because I'm also a TA in the history department. And that's really what helped and is helping me get through, just having people to vent to or to talk about teaching strategies or things we're reading in class and creating that community, because sometimes you don't quite necessarily know where to find that, and they, you know, my friends and colleagues and coworkers understand the struggle that we're all going through, and then having that supportive committee and advisor. Last October, I believe, I had to switch advisors, and that just kind of put a wrench in the plans that I had for my dissertation and my, you know, continuing the program. But it worked out in the best, because now I have an advisor that is more pop culture focused, more media focused, which is what I want to go into. Even though it was unfortunate, it still worked out. And now I have, as everyone was saying, a committee that understands what I want to do and is there to support that. And for me, it's more about personality. Like if I don't have a good vibe about you, we may not be able to do the best work that we can for what I want to accomplish, as well as, you know, looking at things that they're researching and things like that. But it's also about that working relationship too, for me, that was important in choosing who to help me along this process.
Yeah, it's important to remember that, as Matthew was saying, we're each human beings, and it's not like we're robots that can be just like programmed and you just have to follow along and do what the bureaucracy of the school wants. You should be making it your own thing, because it's a big deal to get your PhD. It's a huge accomplishment. Colleen, sorry.
Yeah, a couple of different things. One, you mentioned like making it your own thing, and I'm in this situation where I'm not in I don't want to say supportive program, but you know, I'm in a traditional English PhD where finding an advisor who did anything with pop culture was incredibly difficult. My advisor does comic studies, which is not even remotely close to what I study, but it was at least, you know, a common outsider feeling. So that was what I was able to do, but I've also learned a lot about making my own thing out of it, you know, coming into a program that doesn't have the support system, doesn't have the, you know, what you need to succeed in a pop culture program, because you're not in a pop culture program. So finding a way to make things work for you, you know, I'm making this work for me. I'm taking this English program and doing what I can to turn it into my own little pop culture program. And then also I didn't want to echo what everybody's been saying about having a good community. Despite the fact that I don't have any other pop culture people around me, my cohort is actually fantastic. Everybody else is studying like traditional English lit or rhetoric concepts, but we all have been able to build like a community together and shared support system. And even if nobody knows what I'm talking about when I start rambling about representation in Star Wars or whatever, they at least listen and they want to know what I'm talking about. So that's been really good. And then also finding academic Twitter was a completely game-changing experience for me, because I was able to find other pop culture scholars, and that's what actually gave me the push to transition from, when I started my PhD, I was technically a Shakespearean scholar, because I thought I had to be realistic. But finding academic Twitter and realizing that no, it was okay to work on something that I really loved and study pop culture. And, I have the support system. If I have a question, I can reach out to some of the more advanced, faculty and get support in, publishing and everything. So that's been a really amazing support system.
You'd probably be able to find more things to do with popular culture than just focusing on Shakespeare at this point. It feels like everything's been written about him, but I don't know, maybe that's Shakespeare in popular culture. Now that's a great area. All right, my bias. Kristine, are there any questions you would have about starting a PhD program? I mean, fingers crossed getting in, but any questions you have about how to start?
You know that saying that I don't even know what I don't know? And I feel a little bit like that. So I had a 13-year break between my bachelor's and my master's program. And I tell everybody my master's program was my midlife crisis. I was in my late 30s and I ran away to grad school. And, life was weird. And it was just, it was time to do that. I was working in tech, dot-com bubble crash, the Y2K thing, and then 9/11. And I was like, out, I need a break. And so a couple of years later, I ran away to grad school, but it was a very non-traditional program. And so it was a great books program, and it was very small, 8 to 10 students in a room. And we sat around and asked questions about the foundational texts of Western civilization. So while I have a master's program, I don't really feel like I've done grad school. And so I guess the first question is, I'm not sure what to expect. I've been teaching at the undergrad level for eons, and I do have a graduate certificate in business from a summer a couple of years ago. But I guess because I don't have, sorry, this is a rambling answer, but I'm getting there. I guess because I'm not coming from an American culture studies undergrad or a pop culture studies undergrad, I guess what my best question is what to expect when I walk into class those first couple of days. And I've been trying to do some reading this semester to just shore up my foundation. But what do you wish you knew before you step foot on campus semester 1? Anybody?
One thing that I wish I had known, I'm a first generation grad, so no one in my family had ever gone to college. So I didn't know any of the things that one ought to have needed to know as an undergrad on up through the PhD. And being comfortable with realizing you don't know everything, you can't know everything, and also no one else knows everything. So like your topic, when you started talking, I immediately thought like, oh, you're going to need to read, or at least if I were you, I would read a lot of posthumanism. And I know a bit about posthumanism, right? Like I've read a little bit of it, but you go to a conference and you meet someone and they're like, hi, I'm Carrie Wolf. And I know everything about posthumanism. And I know everything about every single scholar who's ever existed in the entire history of the world. And you're quite intimidated by whoever you meet at these conferences, but they also don't know everything. So I think being very uncomfortable, getting used to that is something I wish someone had told me instead of just being a giant mess of anxiety. Sometimes I have anxiety, but just aside from feeling that and then feeling anxious about feeling anxious, just realize that everyone else has imposter syndrome and everyone else doesn't know everything. And everyone else is also, there are weeks where you're barely going to get all the readings done, or there's going to be a week where you can't read everything because your car broke. And, when you're in the classroom, everyone forgets that you have a life. But that impacts what you are able to do in the classroom, or if that paper turned out as good as you wanted it to turn out, but your dog died, that's to me more important than your paper for that one class that you may never publish. But being comfortable, being uncomfortable, and realizing that everyone's also kind of sort of figuring it out as they go too. I wish someone had told me that instead of pretending they knew what was going on. I would have preferred someone just go, I don't know. Just trying to figure it out.
to build off of what Matt was saying of not everyone knows what they're talking about, my master's program was more practical. It was a documentary, it was digital storytelling. And so it wasn't your traditional theory-based classes that a lot of master's programs are. And so when and I did completely straight through undergrad, 2 years of master's, and then PhD. And so when I started my PhD program, the first semester I took I forget the exact name of it, but it was essentially a Marxist class. And it was my first introduction to anything Marx. I'd never read Marx. I'd never really learned about Marx. You know, you grew up hearing Marx, but that was it. And it was a cross-listed class between American Cultural Studies and SMC, which is School of Media and Communication. And it was a very interesting class for me. Not only was it super heavy on the reading, heavy on Marx and like reading that I have never tried before, but because of the cross-listed aspect, there were a lot of ACS students, and ACS and SMC have very different theories. If you aren't aware of that, communication and American culture and cultural studies in general and comm are two very different fields. And so I'm walking into a classroom where all of these mostly men, mostly white men, are just rattling off these theories and these theorists and like pretending they know more than they probably did, because we were all first and second year PhD students trying to like, hey, I know everything. And I felt very, the word that comes to mind is belittled, but that's not quite right. But I felt very awkward. I wasn't supposed to be there. It just wasn't, and it wasn't anything to do with the professor. The professor was great. I love the professor. It was just the students there. And so recognizing that, especially if you're in a cross-listed class, that theories are going to be different. It's okay to not know the theories. It's okay to not know the theorists. And you're going to, like, that is the point. You're going to learn things. You're going to learn theories. You're going to learn these people. And so now I know the tiniest bit of Marx, that I know enough to get in trouble, and that's it. Which had nothing to do with my research either. And so that was kind of what I wish going in, is that more people were more obvious to the fact that people like to posture, that they know that what they're talking about, but it's really just an act. So that's kind of my first semester experience of PhD.
Can I build off of that?
Oh, sorry.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to kind of jump in and add on to that. When you're in your PhD, the aim is slightly different from when you're an undergrad or when you're a master's. The aim is you are going to become the expert. You're going to be producing the knowledge instead of like absorbing the knowledge. And so you're taking classes, and they're going to feel sort of similar perhaps to the classes you took as an MA, but the goal of those classes is for you to pick and choose the tools that are going to be useful to you. And so when Dr. Julia, when you said, you know, I know a little Marx now, but it wasn't relevant to my project, just knowing that that's okay, that everything that you have in all of your classes doesn't have to make its way into your dissertation, but now you get to be the expert enough to say, that was great, and I'm glad that I learned about that, but I don't want to use that, and I'm not going to, because I'm the boss in charge of my own project. And that's like a weird feeling to finally step into those shoes and say, the teacher doesn't dictate the paper that I write. I'm going to dictate to the teacher what I find useful and what I want to use. And so as much as you can, picking classes and writing papers in those classes that you can cannibalize and use for other things like conference presentations and dissertations. Because again, the goal isn't just assemble a set of good grades in classes in the way that you did as an undergrad or a master's, but the real goal is the dissertation, and the classes are tools for you to use to build that dissertation. And if you have a weird like IKEA tool that you don't know what it does, or that it's not useful to build the project that you're building, then you just throw it away. Or not throw it away, but like put it in a drawer and don't worry about it.
Yeah, I did documentary and fan studies in a place that doesn't really happen. And so cannibalizing and creating things in organizational comm and creating that into a fan studies paper, like you're just kind of having to force the square peg into the circle hole. And fortunately, all of my professors were really open to that. And we had a very finite number of classes. I couldn't really pick and choose each year. There was only like maybe 4 options, and you had to take 3 of them. And so you're going to have classes that you don't feel are relevant, but it'll help you, especially if you go into teaching. I'm in a small private liberal arts where there's classes that I've never taken a class in and I'm now teaching. So hopefully some of that comes out too. Sorry, Leigh, I cut you off.
No, that's fine. I was going to kind of piggyback in the same vein. The classes that I took my first semester, I thought were going to be really awesome and really useful, and they absolutely weren't, right? Because I didn't really know what I was going to do. But the classes that I ended up in, much like Julia's saying, we had a certain number of classes that were available. We didn't have a lot of choice. Those classes ended up being the most useful and really shaped the entire direction of my PhD. So be open with the classes that you're expecting to take. Obviously, you want to go into any program, whether it's an MA or a PhD, with at least a vague idea of what you're interested in, hopefully, right? And it sounds like you, Kristine, certainly have a pretty solid idea of what you at least want to explore or start exploring, and take classes that will help facilitate that. But also, you never know what you're going to learn in another class, right? I took a cross-listed class, a political science, political theory class, that ended up being the most useful class I took in my entire program. In terms of the engagement, my engagement with political theories of empire and imperial narratives and that sort of thing. And if I hadn't taken it, who knows what would have ended up happening. So, there's a bit of, be smart about what you take, but also be willing to take things that may not relate, and, because you never know what you're going to find. So, yeah.
Great advice all the way around. I really appreciate all of that knowledge. It's I'm grateful that I didn't go straight through. A lot of reasons I would have changed my mind on what I actually ended up studying. But really, I'm in my early 50s now, and so I look at the world and everything, and interactions and imposter syndrome and all those sorts of things much differently than obviously I would have at 25 or 30 or whatever. And that I can really identify to that feeling of you're walking into an area where everybody around you is posturing and already has all the answers and know more than anybody else in the room. I spent the 90s in technology as a white woman, and I was normally the only woman at the table. And as I progressed up, it was a lot of, no, I'm not your secretary, I'm actually running this meeting. And so you get some thick skin quickly and learn to figure out, who's BSing pretty quickly. And I think that says more about them than you anyhow. So I'm honestly expecting that. But the advice about the different types of classes are helpful. I've signed up for a graduate certificate in public history as well. So there'll be a crossover with some, I don't even know what, honestly, because I have a friend of mine who is a museum director and has his PhD in that field and has worked in several different types of museums. And I still only understand about that much of what he says when he's talking. So I'm looking forward to it. But I don't even know what to expect there. So I'm looking for a lot of that experience. Dr. Leigh, correct? And I'm looking forward to a lot of that same, like you had with the political theory class. Oh, I didn't think this would be helpful, but now it's really directing a whole lot of how do I talk about this thing that when I mention, people go, oh, Blade Runner, got it. And it's so much bigger than just that story. So,
Kristine, I'm curious. I'm curious if Colleen and Brie, being closer to having entered their PhD program, if you have anything you want to add on to what the completed folks have been saying about what to expect or what to do when you're starting that program.
Yeah, a lot of what was said resonated a lot with like things that you don't think are going to be very helpful. Limited numbers of classes, right? I haven't been able to take a single pop culture class in my PhD, and I'm about to finish coursework, which is, I was also very excited thinking I was going to take cool classes, and then it didn't work out. But what I learned and my advice would be figure out how to make it work for you. figure out how to change, you know, the topic of a course is a very broad area. How can you make that topic fit your own research interests and, you know, maybe not publications, but I took a class on affect theory and queer theory, and I'm terrible with theory. I don't know what I learned in that class. I don't know if I learned anything in that class, but I ended up being able to write a final paper that I'm really proud of, that I'd love to get published, but I don't really know how to do that, which is another grad student issue, is not knowing how to get published. But so being able to take the subject of a course and mold it, you know, I had to take an American Lit class, and somehow managed to write my final paper on film adaptations of Shakespeare. So, you know, figuring out the way to twist the topic, work with your professors, because they know that you're kind of working with your own approach and your own needs. And so the professor was like, all right, well, we got to figure out how to make this relevant, but we can still work with what you want to work with. So kind of figuring out how to make things work for you and figuring out how to make things work with the professor and with the course.
Great.
Yeah, I would say the same thing. I guess I kind of had a similar experience as Colleen. Like my first semester, I took a class on sports, race, and gender, I think was the title. And I don't do sports or gender that much, but I was able to work within that very, very broad topic and find something about representation in basketball and hip hop that will hope, I don't know how it will, but maybe it will tie into my dissertation. And that's one of the things that throughout all my grad school experiences, working within that and using whatever I'm writing in classes to tie into my dissertation. And instead of just writing, you know, paper because, you know, I have to, I'm trying to figure out aspects of the final project that I can do in class. And then the other thing that I guess I would add to what everybody else has been saying is just, for me personally, being comfortable and okay with not knowing everything, especially in my first year of my PhD program. Like I felt like I didn't know everything, and I definitely did not know everything, and that scared me a little bit. But as you know, I kept going through it, I was like, well, that's fine that I don't know it, because I can research it, or I can ask my classmates, talk to my advisors and things like that, instead of putting that anxiety and that nervousness on me that, well, somebody's going to know that I don't know the answer, and then they're going to think this certain way about me. I've learned to let that go more and just, well, if I don't know it, I don't know it. But the whole point of this, as people have been saying, is you're going to be that expert at the end of your program.
Yeah, and
I spent countless. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, we have to start wrapping up here.
Oh, sure.
But I want to say, I think this idea of remembering that you're learning to be the expert is both, you know, that is very scary, because that's not something that we're really prepared for. And anyone who says they are prepared maybe is a little too overconfident about that and shouldn't be trusted. But that idea of taking that and taking that sense of power, I think, is really important to remember. So maybe just as a final wrap-up question, I think we're going to have more of these, because I think there's so much we could still cover. But to wrap things up, what would be one thing you could suggest for how to make it your own? How to make that graduate school experience as a pop culture scholar your own thing?
So I'd be interested to hear what other people say about this, but this is what I believe, that I just hit my microphone, that you really need to choose a topic for your project that you just love and adore, and that you know, even if you never get a job on the topic, even if you never publish a single paper on the topic, you'll still be glad that you spent that time with that object. Because I think, you know, people maybe try to hunt for the hot topic, the thing that they think is going to be in vogue and getting hired for in, you know, 3 or 4 years when they're done with the PhD. And that's just impossible to predict, and anything that's super hot right now is going to be, they're going to be done hiring for by the time that you get done, or, you know, then who knows what the next trend is going to be. And so it just has to be something that you want to sit with and that you want to write about. And then, like other people have been saying, you know, you're assembling these tools that then you can use to teach classes in professional communication, or, you know, the sort of omnibus courses at a liberal arts college, or what have you. So, you know, that's going to be the thing that you lean back on when you get a job, not I magically happen to pick the one dissertation topic that everybody is clamoring for in 5 years because I'm Nostradamus. Like, you can't do that. So don't bother trying to do that or trying to game the system. Just follow the reason that you went into grad school for the first place. That's my opinion, but maybe, I don't know if other people are like better at gaming the system. And so they were like, no, you do this. And then you get, you know, well, that's maybe, you know, job market navigation could be a whole other meeting of ours for us to try sometime. So maybe we'll set that aside for now. But
yeah, I'll just very briefly echo Megan's advice on your enthusiasm. You know, I think that's one of the really great things about pop culture is we can pick stuff we love, and that's sort of okay, you know. And, you know, I did science fiction, and so people who, you know, tend to do science fiction because they love science fiction, and so that's sort of how it works. And so pick something that you really like and run with it. And the other thing that I'll add to that is own that topic. Right, especially if you're not in a pop culture program or you're encountering other people in a non-pop culture scenario, like at conferences. Own your topic and be proud of what you do and be enthusiastic about it. That has always worked really well in my favor. I was always the one who does Star Trek. And, you know, at first I was like, oh God, what am I doing to myself? Am I going to regret this? You know, and maybe, you know, one day I will, but not yet. You know, and it was fun too. So, you know, I had that maybe even over some of my friends who were working with very different kinds of topics. So love it and own it.
And don't apologize for it.
I was gonna say embrace it. And so very much what Leigh just said. And now I'm the only person at my institution that really focuses on pop culture studies. So I frequently get people who will send me things, or they hear fan studies mentioned on NPR and they send me the article. And I taught my entire faculty the word fanish on my very first day here. And so the whole faculty is like 40 people. It's not that many, but so really just embrace it. I became the person who paved the way for fan studies at in SNC at BG. And so my friend Shanna is now doing it. She was 2 years behind me. And so I kind of made it easier for her to go through. So just because you're doing it on your own doesn't mean that there's not going to be other people behind you that you are helping pave the way for them to, you know, make it easier for them. I taught people fan studies in my department as I taught it myself, or I learned it myself. So embrace it and just be happy with it.
Tell it. So it's funny that you bring that up, just helping other people like along the way and maybe changing minds. So when I was in grad school, there was this one professor in my English program who was just really irritated that I refused to study novels, because he was just like, you're in an English program, like novels is what we do. And, but he, you know, just kind of, for his class, I wrote a paper on a novel and just put it in a drawer and was like, okay, oh, well, I won't ever use this, and that's fine. And last year, he is the editor of a literary criticism journal. And last year he wrote me asking me to review a book for his journal about game studies, which is what I study. And so it was just like, you know, a nice moment of, okay, so it wasn't just me, obviously, but, you know, over the course of time, you know, people kind of wore away and opened up space within the field to say, yeah, video games can have a place in this venerable old literary criticism journal. And so, you know, maybe it's hard in the moment when you're feeling frustrated to kind of hold on to that and be like, someday, you know, we will be an elf and a dwarf on the same team fighting together. But like, you know, if you can just hold on to that fantasy scenario, even if it never happens, you know, maybe you're opening doors in someone else's mind, or maybe like like Julia was saying, you're paving the way for the next person who comes through, so that, you know, they it doesn't seem quite as weird because we had a student here 2 years ago who did this weird video game stuff. And so, oh, you want to study that? I guess that's possible to do. Like you're just sort of slowly, wearing away the track through the forest, I guess.
And to be able to do that requires you, like we've been saying, find that passion, because that passion, that fire, that's going to fuel you in those cold nights when it doesn't seem like anyone else cares about the same thing and you don't know what to do. So yeah, find that passion and then find the people who do care about different things and that network. Because I know when I was in graduate school, it was 2003 to 2008. Didn't really have the social media platforms, so I didn't have any of that outside networking. I did have Wikipedia though, and I found Wikipedia very helpful for understanding those theories that I had no idea what was going on with. But having the ability to connect with people who can help you, and if you can have someone in your committee, your advisor who's willing to push the boundaries as well. And that's again where that personality it can come in too. So it's not just their CV, it's who they are. We're all humans. We're not just the summations of our work. But I do have to wrap us up now because I have to run over to another meeting. But thank you everyone for coming here today, and I will most likely be putting out a call for another one of these, as well as for one on job market issues and publishing. I think those would be some really important topics to talk about, given what we're saying here. So thank you everyone for coming to the dialogue today.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks.
Thank
Have a
Thank
good
you
one,
very
y'all.
much, everyone.
Bye.